Have you ever heard a story so incredible it sounds like pure fantasy? A tale of faith, trumpets, and walls that come tumbling down? Today, we read diving deep into one of the most famous and debated stories from the Old Testament, the Battle of Jericho. Was it a historical event, a powerful allegory, or something in between? Let's march around the walls and find out. The story, as told in the book of Joshua, is epic. After 40 years of wandering in the desert, the Israelites, led by Joshua, finally stand at the doorstep of the Promised Land. But there's a huge obstacle in their way: the heavily fortified city of Jericho. This wasn't just any city. It was ancient, powerful, and its walls were said to be impenetrable. From a military perspective, the Israelites' situation looked hopeless. They were a nomadic people, not a trained army equipped for siege warfare. So what does Joshua do? He turns to God for a plan, and the instructions he receives are unconventional, to say the least. No siege towers, no battering rams, no secret tunnels. Instead, God commands the Israelite army to march around the city once a day for 6 straight days. They were to be led by 7 priests carrying trumpets made of ram's horns, followed by the sacred Ark of the Covenant. The entire army was to follow in complete silence. No battle cries, no taunts, just the sound of marching feet and the priest's trumpets. Imagine being an inhabitant of Jericho. For 6 days, you watch this bizarre procession circle your city. A silent army, the haunting sound of horns, and a mysterious golden box. It must have been an incredible psychological game. Was it a religious ritual? A strange military tactic? The tension must have been unbearable. The people of Jericho probably went from mocking the strange sight on day 1 to feeling a growing sense of dread by day 6. Then came the 7th day. The instructions changed. On this day, they were to march around the city not once, but 7 times. After the 7th lap, the priests would sound a long, mighty blast on their trumpets. At that signal, the entire army was to let out a massive shout, a collective roar they had been holding in for a week. And as they did, the Bible says the mighty walls of Jericho collapsed, falling flat. The Israelites then charged into the defenseless city and claimed their first major victory in the conquest of Canaan. It's a powerful story of obedience and faith triumphing over impossible odds. For millennia, it has inspired believers, symbolizing that with divine help, no obstacle is too great to overcome. But this is where the story gets even more interesting. For centuries, the tale of Jericho was just that, a story in a sacred text. But in the 19th and 20th centuries, a new kind of explorer arrived: the archaeologist. Armed with shovels and science, they began to dig into the ancient mound known as Tel Es Sultan, the site of ancient Jericho. They were looking for evidence. Did the walls really fall down? The excavations at Jericho have a long and complicated history. The first major digs were led by German archaeologists in the early 1900s. They did find collapsed mud brick walls. Exciting, right? But dating them was the problem. Later, a British archaeologist named Kathleen Kenyon conducted much more meticulous excavations in the 1950s. Using more advanced techniques, she came to a startling conclusion. Yes, Jericho had impressive walls, and yes, they had been destroyed and rebuilt many times over its long history. However, based on her analysis of pottery and other artifacts, she concluded that the Great Walls of the city had been destroyed around 1550 BC, long before the time Joshua and the Israelites would have arrived, which is typically dated to around 1400 BC. In fact, she argued that by Joshua's time, Jericho was a small, sparsely populated settlement, perhaps without any walls at all. This created a huge debate. Did archaeology just disprove the Bible? For many, Kenyon's findings were a major blow. But the story doesn't end there. In the decades since Kenyon, other archaeologists have re-examined her findings and the evidence from Jericho. Dr. Bryant Wood, for example, took another look at the pottery. He argued that Kenyon had misdated some key pieces and that a specific type of locally made pottery, along with imported Cypriot pottery, actually pointed to a destruction date right around 1400 BC, a perfect match for the biblical timeline. Wood also pointed to other fascinating details found in the ruins. Archaeologists found large storage jars full of grain in the destroyed homes. This is unusual for a city that has been conquered after a long siege. Normally, a long siege would mean the city's food supplies would be completely used up. But the Bible says the siege of Jericho was incredibly short, only 7 days. The abundance of grain seems to fit the biblical narrative perfectly. Furthermore, the Bible says the Israelites were commanded not to take any plunder from the city, but to burn it completely. The discovery of these full grain jars, left to burn, seems to corroborate this specific detail. So what about the walls themselves? The evidence points to a massive mud brick wall built on top of a large stone retaining wall. Dr. Wood proposes that an earthquake could have caused the mud brick wall to collapse and fall outwards, down over the retaining wall, creating a convenient ramp for the Israelites to charge right into the city. The Bible doesn't mention an earthquake, but many scholars see no conflict between a natural event like an earthquake and a divinely orchestrated one. After all, the miracle wasn't necessarily that the walls fell, but that they fell at the exact right moment, on cue with the trumpets and the shout. So where does that leave us? The archaeological evidence is complex and debated. We don't have a definitive, universally accepted answer. Some scholars stick with Kenyon's conclusions. Others find Wood's arguments compelling. And some suggest the story was never meant to be a literal historical report, but a theological one. Perhaps the point isn't about the physics of crumbling walls. Perhaps the story of Jericho is a powerful allegory about a different kind of warfare. It's about breaking down the walls we build in our own lives. Walls of fear, of doubt, of hatred. The strategy wasn't military, it was spiritual. It involved patience, marching for 6 days, discipline, staying silent, and finally, a unified, explosive act of faith, the shout. It teaches that some battles aren't won with swords and spears, but with persistence and belief in a power greater than ourselves. Whether you see it as literal history, a divinely guided event, or a profound spiritual metaphor, the story of the walls of Jericho continues to resonate. It challenges us to look at the impenetrable walls in our own paths and ask, what would happen if we faced them not with brute force, but with relentless faith and a collective shout of purpose? The dust at Tel Es Sultan may never give us all the answers, but the power of the story is undeniable. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Was it history, a miracle, or a metaphor? I'd love to hear your perspective. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey into the past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more explorations of history's greatest mysteries. See you next time.